All right, so we're going to wrap up our Cold War unit presentation with the Reagan administration and the George H.W. Bush Sr. Uh, administration. The Reagan administration from 1981 to 1989, there was a momentous, fundamental shift in foreign policy in regards to the Cold War. No longer containment, no longer domino theory, no longer, we'll do this sleight of hand stuff, we'll fight in the shadows, or all this. It was rollback. The Reagan doctrine was this, and you need to write this down in your notes. The Reagan doctrine, when he was asked, "What is your stance against the communist sphere?" He says, "We win, they lose." Quite simple, actually, and it was very profound and very direct. It spoke volumes. We win, and they lose. Um, Within minutes of Reagan being sworn in as the President of the United States, the American hostages being held in Iran were released, and many people begin to see this as the rollback of American almost inferiority when it came to the communist sphere. And now here we go. We have the Reagan doctrine. We're going to begin this rollback, and President Reagan and his administration, and we're very aggressive in taking back the world from communist domination. The presidency began at one major political ground in the Cold War through rhetoric. Some say, they call Reagan the great communicator. Well, it's true. And we're going to look at a few of these speeches. The Evil Empire speech. I want to read this quote to you. "So in your discussions of the nuclear freeze proposals, I urge you to beware the temptation of pride, the temptation of blindly declaring yourselves above it all and label both sides equally at fault, to ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, to simply call the arms race a giant misunderstanding and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil." Uh, President Reagan here is casting the Cold War, the communist side at least, again, like Kennedy, in a very moral light, saying that they're evil and we are right and we are good. And he's saying that we don't need to stand down, we need to stand up to the communist sphere of influence. And Mr. Reagan built up the military, quite honestly. He spent a lot of money on the United States military to make us the big dog and make everyone else really scared to come against us. Another incredible moment. I'm going to provide you the link of the speech at the Brandenburg Gate. It's one of my favorites, and you don't have to watch it, but I recommend you do. I want you to take note of the fact behind Mr. Reagan there that there's this window that's framing the gate, and there's almost like this bluish gray wall there. Now that wall and that glass that's there, that's bulletproof. Uh, they were a little nervous about the possibility of a sniper being in East Berlin. This is where it happened, in Berlin, at the Berlin Wall. A sniper from East Berlin taking a shot at President Reagan while he gave the speech just inside the gate in West Berlin. Let's read the quote here. "We welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace. There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Wow. Here we have President Reagan standing at what many considered the symbol of the Cold War, uh, but many may mistakenly confuse as the actual Iron Curtain that Churchill spoke about. And we have the American president challenging the Soviet premier saying, tear down this wall. If you're serious about relaxing relations with the United States, if you're serious about coming in to the rest of the world, liberalized and offering freedom to your people, then come to this gate and open it. Come to this wall and tear it down. Very momentous moment in the Cold War history. And there's Mr. Gorbachev with President Reagan. Gorbachev was a very reform-minded Soviet leader, and he's known for two things in Soviet history, Russian history, I should say: perestroika, the restructuring to overcome economic stagnation and social disorder; glasnost, the increased openness and transparency in government. I believe that these two worked very well together in ending the war together, ending the political differences together, uh, and really putting the past in the past, and making the world safe. Of I mean, we still deal with mutually assured destruction, but it's not so much of a scary issue as it was. So President Reagan, near the end of his administration, proposed the construction of the Strategic Defense Initiative. Critics mocked it, calling it Star Wars, and you can see why in just a minute. It was a high-tech shield against missile strikes on the U.S., and he pledged that if the effort was successful, the U.S. would share the technology with the Soviet Union. But the Soviets feared that the system would give the United States the ability to launch a nuclear first strike with impunity, and the Soviet premier began to moderate Soviet policy because of it. And Reagan negotiated the first agreement, really, to really dismantle, to build off of Nixon's work there, to really dismantle nuclear warheads. Reagan staffers later revealed that the program was quite actually a bluff aimed at exposing the Soviet Union's weakness, and that was economics. They couldn't keep up with um, the cost that it would take to construct something like this. And at the time, the American economy was booming, and many can blame Reagan for all the spending that he did with the military. But in all actuality, let's think about this: if you're in a good economic position and your enemy is in a weaker economic position, um, you'd probably be doing a good job by spending money, because it exploits a weakness there. So the SDI was really successful in opening up negotiations between the U.S. and the USSR. Shortly thereafter, George H.W. Bush Sr. became president. He was Reagan's vice president. And he focused on foreign policy almost to a fault, at the expense of domestic policy, really. And that hurt his campaign in 1992 against Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton. And a little Cold War background: he was a CIA director from '76 to '77, and he was brought in to really try to reform the agency in light of all of the accusations that the CIA was facing, the runaway rogue agents and things of that nature. But on November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall comes down. It really becomes the symbol of what is happening over there in the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc countries. There's a great big stirring for democracy and openness and capitalism in these people's societies, and they began to resist the communists, who were quite honestly in a very weak political and economic situation. So the Soviet Union collapses on December 25th, 1991. And if you see here, take a quick little gander, that statue right there. That's Mr. Vladimir Lenin. I hope you remember him from part 1 of this series. He's the symbol of the communist takeover. He's the symbol of everything that is good. He's the George Washington. Let's put it that way. He's the George Washington of the Soviet Union. And here he is laying on the ground. He's been pulled down. The Soviet Union has collapsed. And the proof that the Cold War had actually ended came during the 1991 Gulf War against Iraq, when the expiring USSR failed to give Iraq the spy satellite data that would have exposed U.S. preparation for a flank attack during the Gulf War. Saddam Hussein asked for this intelligence, and the Soviets were not able to deliver. So it gives you a little peek there as to how things were going. So who won the Cold War? Can we point to any one president? Can we point to any one group? Can we point to any one policy and say that is who or what factor ended the Cold War? But I make an argument here that it took all of, well, the later half of 20th century history and foreign policy to win the Cold War, quote unquote, win it for good. It took from Truman to George H.W. Bush. I got it right this time. It took from Truman to Bush and all these men in between who stood their ground, who made the right calls, sometimes the wrong calls, but either way, the Soviet Union never overtook the world. And the United States, though we propped up some governments and some fell, and we had some messes to deal with, for the most part, did a pretty good job. Forgive me for being self-congratulatory, but that's just the way I feel. And you can argue the other way. I mean, you could argue that the Eastern Bloc countries were going to overthrow the Soviet Union anyway. That's fine with me. But I guess the bottom line is that we are still free and we are still a democratic society here in the United States. So just to kind of launch into the war on terror a little bit, I want you to just reflect the roots in the Cold War, how we fight the war on terror. Obviously, we don't need a declaration of war for a president to go to war. An expansion and a check on congressional and presidential power. This may also be something that we can use as a test question. Hint, hint. That wraps up our presentation on the Cold War.